Ever since the first Ludum Dare event, two things never changed. The first is a constant confusion of how to pronounce it, because it's Latin, and Latin is confusing.
Romanes eunt domus. People call Romanes, they go the house.
The other is that the jam and website are run by Mike Casperzak. By Mike, right. This time around, Mike didn't host the event because he's working on the site full time to fix the exploitable voting system until Ludum Dare in December. Thanks to Sorceress and other community members, the jam still took place, although without voting. No voting also meant less pressure, I concluded, and I was eager to participate since in April I couldn't come up with an idea, and after many hours of torment I gave up. My past entries were relatively polished and feature complete to my initial ideas, except Pony. Pony was different. Yeah, so I felt rather confident that I could create something even better without sacrificing sleep, meals, nor much of my weekend. This is the story of how that turned out, the post-mortem of my game 6210 BC. I wanted to start with as much inspiration and motivation I could get before the kickoff, and indulged myself with retro gaming magazines before work. The jam officially begins at what's 3 in the morning local time. Lucky for me, I get home from work just an hour earlier. With everything set up, I administered a final dose of inspiration before compulsively checking Twitter for the theme announcement when it was time. The theme was Ancient Technology, and I utterly blacked out, just like with any theme. Still, I tried my best to get any stupid little idea out of my system and just write it down. I started viewing ancient technology from a perspective of ancient gaming hardware. I looked for inspiration to retro gamer, retro, making games, and even the Atari 2600 itself. Half an hour later, I found myself watching Paradroid gameplay on YouTube, which didn't get me anywhere. I needed a different approach. I remembered a GDC talk from 2014 by Asher Vollmer about his way of design. Up front, he states 4 goals for a game, and where they all meet, bam, that's your game.
I mean, it wasn't like easy or magic, but it was like, every time that we came to a design decision, like I could evaluate it against all these different goals, and either it fit in that juicy center or it didn't, and I could say, yes, this works, or no, this doesn't.
My 4 goals quickly became a mind map, which turned into doodles. Just an hour in, and all my initial confidence had vanished. So yeah, I was low-spirited and shared my self-pity on Twitter and the LD blog. Knowing that I was not alone in my distress was comforting, at least. Thanks, guys. I was gridlocked and tired and retired for the day. Maybe, I thought, an idea would emerge in my dreams, provided I had plenty of sleep. The next day, however, was more of the same. In my dreams that night, I had met John Blow. He had had some advice for me, but I just couldn't recall what it was. Almost 12 hours in, and yeah, no idea. And just staring at the screen, didn't seem that enticing at all. It just needed a change of scenery. So I took Connie out on a lovely ride through the fields and towns of Bavaria. We ended up in a little cafe or restaurant for cake and coffee. There I got my system properly satiated, caffeinated, and had my change of scenery, but the ideas just wouldn't start flowing as I had hoped. At least Connie was making some progress on her novel, as I continued writing down any gameplay fragments that manifested themselves out of thin air. Then I had it. What if you were a hunter-gatherer throwing stones at your enemies while they already acquired the technology of spears? Over a piece of cow, I contemplated a bit more and came up with a simple premise. In a top-down game, the player had to gather resources and fight enemies, so the elders in the village could upgrade the player's weapon or gathering tools. If the player took too long, the enemies would have better developed weapons. The goal would be to find 4 pieces of a magical device that would win the technology war. A Nokia 6210, my first cell phone, and itself a piece of ancient technology. Perfect. It was 7 in the evening when we left, my head already spinning with ideas and implementations and code architecture. First, I would get player movement ready, then add a player sprite, and start with basic combat mechanics and see where things go from there. I still had 32 hours and I was confident that everything was still possible in that amount of time. Finally, at nightfall, I began actually working on something substantial for a change. Once I had the basic movement and input set up, I went to Photoshop to explore the style of the graphics. Yeah, I'm not too good at drawing limbs or noses or lips, so I settled for a simpler approach without all these, but that worked quite well too. I kept adding resource graphics and GUI icons and all that stuff for a rough concept of what the game would look like. It always helps my motivation to code with something that looks already a bit like the final thing. "3 a.m. halftime. At this point, I had a moving character and a basic UI setup. Everything achieved with no live radio in the background keeping me motivated. A stinging pain just behind my eyeball would not subside, it only got stronger, and 1 hour later it had become a severe migraine that cut my day short. I felt terrible and almost blacked out. Just a few hours of sleep, I thought, would put me back in the ring. Yeah, I didn't sleep well. The night was too hot, and so after 5 hours I just decided to get up. Still felt like shit. Only coffee could get me up to speed. And we were out of coffee. Coding without coffee is possible, but useless. So I took Connie out for breakfast on that late sunny Sunday morning. The city was already brimming with cheaper tourists flooding the streets of the old town of Salzburg. But my system was still in power save mode. Finally, I got my coffee and waited for my brain to get up to speed too. But coffee wasn't enough. I needed more sugar, just more.
More?
Porridge with maple syrup turned out to be great brain food, since afterwards I felt like I could.
Take all the world.
Somewhat reinvigorated, I hurried home to throw myself in the final stages of development, as long as the caffeine was still carrying me through. I was aware that my lack of sleep would haunt me with a vengeance later that day, and so I tackled the most annoying part first. Text boxes. I hate coding user interfaces, but there's just no way around it. 3 in the afternoon. Only 12 more hours to go. And that was the moment I realized I don't think I'm gonna make it. Too much was missing. The combat mechanics not even started because of the time I had wasted on a rudimentary UI. I decided to cut my losses and focus on the resource gathering aspect at least, and implement randomly placed trees and stone piles with the ability to harvest them. When you're in a hurry, bad decisions happen. My half-assed finite state implementation bogged me down as I tried to enable the player to deposit their collected resources in the village. Overall, the code was lacking clarity and structure, tangled up in bug-prone dependencies. But I was in the zone, perhaps for too long. Because when I snapped out of it, I realized how hungry I had gotten since breakfast. There was no chocolate in the drawer. And the fridge situation was dire too. A culinary calamity, if you will. Luckily, Connie knew exactly what to do. Pizza tastes so good when delivered and consumed in front of a screen with a funny show on.
The meat of today's episode runs on a little longer than usual. As I say, straight to business, we gotta go. Also, this is the mask that I wear when I fuck. In theory. Okay.
After the last slice, I felt considerably better and should have gotten straight back to coding, despite feeling rather tired. But, well, there still was dessert, you know? And with the last sun rays of Sunday, I returned to the prospect of a hefty crunch time. 8:30, 6.5 hours to go. And the lack of sleep that whole week caught up with me. I could hardly keep my eyes open. From experience, I knew that any programming I did when overly tired would be a tangled mess of unreadable code. Having a power nap would be the best way to avoid this. I was too far behind anyway. Another 20 minutes wouldn't matter. I overslept. Of course I did. By 3 hours. But at least I felt powered enough for the very short and very intense home stretch. I abandoned the combat mechanics entirely and instead focused on equipment upgrades when the player had collected and delivered a specific amount of resources to the village. I added loose resources such as single stones and twigs. Those could be picked up by the player without any tools equipped. Trees and stone piles demanded technology upgrades first, so that was the width of the game mechanics I could muster. With 1 hour to go, I crossed into panic territory. I had neglected actual work on the upgrade mechanic for too long, and now I blanked out on how to implement it the best way in the code I had up to that point. For 10 long minutes I just fumbled around, littering the code with ugly hacks until I had a threadbare implementation. It was a CS teacher's nightmare and spawned bugs like zerglings. The final bug I tackled was the worst, because it sabotaged the upgrade system entirely. 1 minute past the deadline. In my desperation, I tagged the mother of unholy hacks on top of it all, which magically fixed it, I hope. Hey, I had made it! Somehow. Submission hour was on, which meant 1 additional hour to package the game. Making the little icon for the game was almost relaxing. But as I took some screenshots, I realized that the game didn't spawn enough resources for the second upgrade. I hope it was still within the rules to tweak the only variable responsible and recompile the game. Luckily, the upload went without errors and writing the description wasn't a big deal. I was just so relieved that it was over. I still had 20 minutes of the submission hour, which I invested in creating a nice title image. And with 3 minutes before the very final deadline,
I released my finger from the trigger, and then it was over.
I felt content that I still made the deadline, but I'm not too satisfied with the quote-unquote game. In its current state, there is no challenge, no goal, and no interesting novel mechanic. While my game for LD32 Mag Gunner has some potential beyond the gem, 60:10 BC definitely does not. It adds nothing new to the mix. Not ending up outside the box really bugs me. Was it a vain effort then? No. With each jam event I learned something new about game design, programming, about myself. I know that I'm not 21 anymore when I could work straight for 50 hours or longer. Better time and sleep management should go a long way in the next jam. And a little less dining out. Ludum 37 is set to be in December, and despite my poor past entries, I'm looking forward to participating. Well, as long as I don't run out of coffee until then. And for the record, I already hate the theme.